Back to the KDPG Sunday edition. 1.4 billion people live in China, the nation with the world's second largest economy. Those facts make China an alluring market for American companies, including sports leagues like the NBA. Basketball owners have been pushing for years to make inroads on the Silk Road, but all that changed with a single tweet from one team executive, and now the NBA is at the center of an international uproar, and even the league's superstar, LeBron James, has been ensnared after he appeared to support China over pro-democracy demonstrators in Hong Kong. Before we get to our guest, here's Ramy Inocencio from CBS News.
The anger was swift. LeBron James, a beloved athlete in Hong Kong, was now the target. Protesters here burned and trampled his jerseys. But back home, James stood tall and doubled down.
You know, if you feel passionate about it, talk about it. If you're not, if you don't have a lot of knowledge about it or you don't quite understand it, I don't think you should talk about it.
LeBron, famous for speaking up for the disadvantaged, controversially challenged Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey's tweet in support of the Hong Kong protesters, seemingly affecting LeBron's and the league's bottom line. Evan Osnos is a staff writer for New Yorker magazine.
He made the choice that he had to say something, and there wasn't a whole lot of things that he could have said, but this was clearly not the thing that lived up to the image that he has carved out for himself and that people hold him to.
LeBron James's net worth of roughly $450 million nearly compares to a large corporation, and a large portion of that revenue can be linked to China. The NBA says the country's pro-basketball fans are more than double the population of the United States. And for James, that's too big a market to ignore.
LeBron is a unique figure in that world. And so for him, he risks, in his mind, not only hurting potentially the league, but also hurting his own significant profile there.
Besides the NBA, protesters may also be targeting other U.S. businesses. That includes McDonald's and Apple. For the iPhone maker, it's pulled an app from its Chinese app store that let the protesters here find, target, or avoid the Hong Kong police. As for McDonald's, get this, it's majority owned by a Chinese company. Ramy Inocencio, CBS News, Hong Kong.
LeBron James, sponsor Nike, and the NBA have billions invested in China. So how can businesses be part of the Chinese market while still standing up for free expression? Our guest this morning has been doing business in China since the 1980s. David Iwinski is managing director of Pittsburgh-based Blue Water Growth with experience operating and living in China. So let's just start with Blue Water Growth. You're based here. What does the company do?
Well, we essentially try to connect United States companies with firms in China. Sometimes that means helping companies in the United States, and particularly in our region, sell products, but important to protect their intellectual property and also make sure they get paid. Sometimes it means Chinese investments coming this direction. So we've had some situations where manufacturing plants in this region that may have been closed were revitalized by infusions of Chinese capital and Chinese products. So what our company tries to do is be a bridge. We try to be a bridge to business, we try to be a bridge to culture, and we try to be an honest broker and a friend to both sides. Because
So an American company that may be interested in doing business in China but be completely unfamiliar with it, you could help them, as you said, bridge the culture.
Absolutely.
Understand the way things are done.
That's what we're passionate about, and helping people navigate that terrain. Because in addition to the business systems that are different and the legal systems that are different, there are also little cultural landmines, as the NBA is finding out. Things that if you've spent 30 years on the ground, you might be sensitive to, but that might not be apparent to someone on a first trip.
Okay, so you have actually lived in China for how many years?
Well, I went over in 1996. I was working for Respironics and running all their manufacturing, and had the experience of building a greenfield plant in Dongguan, which is quite fascinating, and setting up our sales and marketing operations out of Shanghai. So I spent 5 years on the ground in China every single day.
All right, so I imagine your understanding of the culture is very deep and very thorough. So when you saw that an NBA team general manager had tweeted something that could be seen, that was seen as an insult to the Chinese government, taking sides in the China-Hong Kong dispute, did you have an inkling that it would blow up the way it has?
Oh, the minute I heard about the tweet, I think I said to one of my colleagues, this does not end well. And part of it is, you know, we're going to them. And I truly think that the more commerce between China and the U.S., the better for both nations. Nations that are economically linked have a tendency to work things out rather than get into conflicts. And yes, there are legitimate concerns of both sides on the business sphere, but when you go to someone's backyard and you want to play in it and you want their money for it, and as was noted in the report, we're talking billions of dollars. Starting off by giving them something that is highly sensitive at a point in time where they have a very raised concern is almost certainly going to spark a backlash. And not just in the political sphere. I think it's important to note that one of the things I've observed in 33 years of going to China is the pride of the Chinese people. You know, this was a nation that post-Mao was really destroyed economically, social systems, poverty and starvation. What they've done over the past 40 years is extraordinary. People lifted out of poverty, and they rightfully so have a lot of pride. And so while many folks here have a view that, you know, they may have a negative view of China, for people who are in China and have experienced that transformation, these things are taken a little more personally than they would in the United States.
So if your client was the NBA,
Yeah.
let's say they said, hey, we need your help with this, what would you tell them? You've got LeBron James, who is one of their signature, if not the signature player in the league, essentially saying, gee, I make a lot of money over there and I can stand to make more, so I'm going to make sure economically I say the right thing. Even if in this country we might see that as, hey, that's not what we built our country on. Right. What would you tell the NBA to say, look, there's a lot of money there for you and there is a lot of money for the NBA there? What are you going to tell them?
Well, I think the first thing is there is an emphasis in the discourse so far about how much money is to be made. And in some ways, I think that's kind of backfired on LeBron. People are saying, well, you're selling out your principles in order just to make a few more millions, and you've already got 450. Why don't you take a principled stand? But I actually think the other very viable argument that the NBA has not made is that the more people in China are engaged with Americans, and I kind of like the idea of people in China watching the NBA, eventually the NFL, having more and more connectivity with us. Less isolation and demonization, but more actual understanding, the better it is for this country. And so I think that the NBA, of course they want to make money. That's got to be one of their primary motives. But I think they're also not making the case that the tensions between China and the U.S. will have an effect on us, and they have already in some of the tariff issues and the trade war issues. Whatever we can do to grow in understanding, grow in connectivity, and in both directions, share our cultures, it's better.
Time goes quick. We only have about a minute left. Does an American firm or an American entity like the NBA need then to bite its tongue and not speak publicly about, weigh in on an issue as hot a topic as these Hong Kong demonstrations have been, and just kowtow, in a sense, to the communist government?
Well, to my point of view, if you say kowtow, you're saying that you have to change your political stance. You don't have to change your stance at all. But you have to also recognize that freedom of speech also means people may be free to disagree with you. And if you're going to their backyard and you want their resources, they have the right to change their mind. I think that it's not a matter of kowtowing or giving in, but speaking appropriately on the particular topic. And what they want to do is they want to sell American basketball. And individuals within the NBA, including LeBron James and all the coaches, they're free to speak their mind, but they have to realize that the Chinese may have a very different point of view, and they can, as they say, vote with their pocketbooks.
The commissioner has said you're free to speak your mind, right? After initially sort of apologizing for
Right.
what Morey tweeted, Adam Silver then came out and said, no, we are a league that believes in freedom of speech, so people can say whatever they want to say. It didn't do the job, though. China's still angry. I wish we had more time. We're going to have to wrap it up. David Iwinski, thank you very much. Come back.
It was a pleasure.
We'll
Thank you.
All right, back with some final thoughts in a moment.